Chapter 6. The Rarity of True Faith. Subhuti said to the Buddha, "World-honored one, will there be any sentient beings who, upon hearing these words and phrases, will give rise to genuine faith?" The Buddha replied, "Do not say such a thing. After the Tathagata's passing, in the last 500 years, there will be those who uphold discipline and cultivate virtue. They will be able to give rise to a heart of faith, considering these words and phrases as true. You should know that these individuals have not merely planted wholesome roots in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 Buddhas, but have planted wholesome roots before countless millions of Buddhas. Upon hearing these words and phrases, if they give rise to even a single thought of pure faith, Subhuti, the Tathagata knows and sees that these beings will attain immeasurable blessings. Why is this so? These beings have no longer any notion of self, of person, of sentient being, or of lifespan. They do not cling to any dharma nor non-dharma. Why is this so? If their minds grasp at notions, they will be attached to self, person, sentient being, and lifespan. If they grasp at dharma, they will be attached to self, person, sentient being, and lifespan. If they grasp at the idea of non-dharma, they will be attached to self, person, sentient being, and lifespan. Therefore, one should not grasp at dharma, nor should one grasp at non-dharma. For this reason, the Tathagata always says, "You bhiksus, know that the dharma I speak of is like a raft. Even the dharma must be abandoned. How much more so is the non-dharma?" The first sentence introduces a question, making the Diamond Sutra more relatable, almost like a dialogue between teacher and student. Buddha is telling Subhuti that all forms are illusions. If you dream of seeing the Buddha, or really see the Buddha standing in the clouds, you've been deceived. That's not truly seeing the Buddha. If this happens, just throw a stone at him, or hit him with the Diamond Sutra, and you can say, "You told me, all forms are illusions, and if one sees all forms as non-forms, then one sees the Tathagata. What are you doing here?" There is an old story about Wen Shi, a well-known Chan master who was unable to attain enlightenment despite extensive efforts. He walked from the south, bowing every 3 steps, to Wutai Mountain, the sacred site of Manjushri Bodhisattva, seeking to meet Manjushri. After a long journey, Wen Shi encountered an old man with a white beard and hair who invited him to his hut for tea. The old man asked, "Where do you come from?" Wen Shi replied that he came from the south and wanted to meet Manjushri. The old man asked, "What's Buddhist teachings in the south like?" Wen Shi said, "They are mediocre, so I came here wanting to see the sages in person." The old man said, "The teachings here in Wutai Mountain are mediocre too, mix of saints and commoners, dragons and snakes living together." When she asked how many monks lived on Wutai Mountain, the old man cryptically replied, "There are 3 threes in the front and 3 threes in the back," a saying that people have puzzled over for centuries what it refers to. The old man then tested Wen Shi's understanding of Buddhism. Wen Shi couldn't answer, and the old man frowned and called, "Kunti, walk the guest out." A boy led Wen Shi out, and as Wen Shi turned to thank them, he saw Manjushri Bodhisattva riding on a lion in the sky. Wen Shi realized too late that he had been in the presence of Manjushri, whom he had traveled so far to meet. He wept bitterly in regret. Afterward, Wen Shi redoubled his efforts and eventually attained great enlightenment. Even after enlightenment, Wen Shi humbly worked as a cook in a monastery, performing hard labor. the job of the head cook is very tough. In a temple where 1,000 people eat, the cooking pot in a large monastery is so big that someone of my height could stand inside it, and you wouldn't be able to see me from the outside. To cook for over 1,000 people, the spatula used is so heavy that if you haven't trained in martial arts, you wouldn't be able to lift it. That's why, if you spend 3 years cooking at the Shaolin Temple, your martial arts skills will become extraordinary. You have to pour entire bags of rice into the pot, and when it's time to stir, you need martial arts skills just to move the spatula. Master Wengsi, after attaining enlightenment, was willing to dedicate himself to doing hard labor for everyone, doing tasks that others couldn't handle and enduring what others couldn't endure. This is the path of a bodhisattva. One day, as Wenshi was cooking, Manjushri appeared, riding his lion over the cooking pot. Wenshi recognized him as the old man from Wutai Mountain, grabbed a cooking utensil and said, "Manjushri is Manjushri, Wenshi is Wenshi. What are you doing here?" Manjushri rose to the sky, smiled and said, "A bitter melon is bitter down to the root. A sweet melon is sweet through and through. I have cultivated for 3 great eons, but now even I am disliked by an old monk." This story teaches that all forms are illusions. If a form appears, even if it's the Buddha, it should be dismissed. This principle is also the highest secret of practice. The monk who burned a Buddha statue. Thus, you should never cling to appearances. In the Chan tradition, there's a famous story of a monk named Dangxia Tianran, a disciple of Mazu Daoyi, who, during a cold winter, used a wooden Buddha statue to make a fire and warm himself. The temple's administrator was horrified and worried about the karmic consequences of burning a Buddha. Strangely, the administrator, not Dangxia, ended up losing his hair and eyebrows, showing that clinging to appearances can lead to unintended consequences. This story, known as Dangxia burns the Buddha and the administrator loses his hair, illustrates the Chan teaching of not clinging to forms. Subhuti then expresses doubt, asking if anyone in the future could genuinely believe in such teachings, especially the idea of not clinging to any form. Buddha told Subhuti to not say such thing, do not doubt. Reassures Subhuti by predicting that even in later generations, people who practice discipline and virtue will be able to understand and believe in these teachings. After 500 years. After the Tathagata's passing, 500 years later, there will be those who uphold discipline and cultivate virtue. They will be able to give rise to a heart of faith, considering these words and phrases as true. You should know that these individuals have not merely planted wholesome roots in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 Buddhas, but have planted wholesome roots before countless millions of Buddhas. This statement is profound because it implies that true understanding of the Buddha's teachings, particularly the idea of non-attachment, is extremely difficult. Buddha mentions that after his death, 500 years later, people will still be able to understand and have faith in these teachings due to the virtues they have cultivated over many lifetimes. The Buddha said, "You shouldn't see it that way. After I pass away, 500 years later." Why 500 years? The time when the Buddha was alive, it was called the Age of True Dharma. After the Buddha passed away, it became the Age of Semblance Dharma, a time when there were still Buddha statues and scriptures. When the scriptures and statues are gone and only superstition remains, it is called the Age of Degenerate Dharma. So he said that 500 years after I pass away, there will be people who truly uphold the precepts, cultivate blessings, and engage in many good deeds. When their merit is sufficient, their wisdom will open and they will be able to believe these words. When the Buddha said 500 years later, he was mainly referring to future generations, good deeds, and wisdom. Buddha mentioned earlier that for someone to attain supreme wisdom, they must uphold and observe precepts and cultivate blessings. Only with accumulated positive karma can one gain supreme wisdom. Even to be born with a bit of intelligence is from karma accumulated from more than a lifetime. To attain supreme wisdom is not something one can merely wish for. It must be cultivated. One must practice all kinds of virtuous deeds and accumulate merit to achieve this supreme wisdom. This wisdom is realized through cultivation. It comes from observing precepts and cultivating blessings. Through the accumulation of keeping precepts, avoiding all evil, and practicing all good, one can truly attain great blessings and supreme wisdom. The Buddha specifically pointed out that 500 years after his passing, only those who uphold precepts and cultivate blessings can truly believe in his teachings. The cultural changes after 500 years are a significant issue. In terms of material civilization, times are increasingly progressive, but in terms of humanity, morality, and spirituality, times are increasingly regressive. But when we talk about progress nowadays, we refer to it from the standpoint of material civilization. But Buddhism views the times from a humanitarian perspective. 500 years later, people's wisdom diminishes as they enter the degenerate age of Dharma. At that time, 12-year-olds could already bear children, with very developed brains but increasingly smaller limbs and hands. They would be extremely clever but lack true wisdom, and even plants could harm people. In other words, disasters, diseases, and wars would be constantly present. This is the degenerate age of Dharma, although we haven't reached that point yet. 500 years later, someone who can truly practice good deeds and cultivate blessings, who can develop faith in the teachings of the Buddha like, all appearances are illusory, and if you see that all appearances are not appearances, then you see the Tathagata, will have truly attained prajna wisdom, and this is very difficult to achieve. Most people who practice religion focus on the formalities and often seek something in return for their faith, pursuing results without realizing the futility of such efforts. For example, people go to temples to pray, offering bananas, cakes, and a bunch of incense. And after burning them, they pray, bow, and ask for blessings for their husbands, health, lottery winnings, business success, and then take the bananas back home to eat slowly. Look at it. With such a small investment, they ask for so much. If I were a Buddha or a god, I wouldn't entertain such things. The problem lies with the person themselves. They offer so little but expect everything to be perfect. When their wishes aren't fulfilled, they complain that the bodhisattva isn't effective. Is being a bodhisattva easy? Like an old poem says, being the god is as difficult as being April's weather. Silkworms want warmth while wheat prefers cold. Going out, some pray for sunshine, while farmers wish for rain. The maid harvesting mulberry hopes for cloudy skies. You see, how could God satisfy everyone? People are as difficult as the god, and bodhisattvas have an even tougher job. When two parties are in a legal dispute, both burn incense asking for help to win. Now, who should the bodhisattva help? Should the bodhisattva decide based on who offers more bananas or a larger pig's head? These are all religious rituals, and from a psychological standpoint, they are quite absurd. When people talk about these religious rituals, one can only describe them as incomprehensible, utterly incomprehensible. It's simply beyond explanation, so you can only nod and say, yes, you're about right. Maybe we will talk about it some other day. But that someday might not come until 3 great eons later. In other words, what you don't understand now might not be explained until much later. The Buddha said that this truth, though simple, is hard to believe. He said that in the future there will be those who can trust in this simple truth as the Tao, the way. To have such faith requires great blessings. This blessing isn't worldly fortune. The ability to generate faith isn't superstition, it's rational, true faith. To take this as the truth, the Buddha said you must understand that such a person in the world didn't just cultivate good roots with 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 Buddhas. Such a person didn't cultivate wisdom in just one lifetime. This person has already cultivated good roots before countless Buddhas. They have done countless good deeds and planted such deep good roots, which is why they can develop such profound wisdom. Why is this so? These beings have no longer any notion of self, of person, of sentient being, or of lifespan. They do not cling to any dharma, nor to the idea of non-dharma. When a person attains a state of pure faith in a single thought, understanding that all phenomena are not real, and that everything is ultimately without form, even the concept of formlessness ceases to exist. A person who realizes this level of enlightenment achieves great blessings. Why? Because such a person has already reached the state of Buddhahood in this very life. They have become a living Buddha. Why is this considered the attainment of the Buddha state? Because this person has transcended the 4 aspects of self, the self, others, sentient beings, and lifespan, and has realized true pure faith. When one lets go in a single moment, there is no longer any notion of self, others, sentient beings, or lifespan. These 4 aspects are very significant because all of life's suffering and troubles stem from them. From a psychological perspective, these 4 aspects represent 4 concepts or universal phenomena common to all humans. Each person is heavily attached to the notion of self, especially intellectuals, whose opinions are often deeply rooted in their sense of self. When someone politely asks to sit next to them, they may think, "This foolish person, fine. I'll let you sit because I pity you." This is an expression of self-attachment as the person condescends out of a sense of superiority. People are often caught up in self-attachment, and if one can overcome this, they are close to liberation. Once self-attachment is overcome, there is no attachment to form, and everything becomes equal. One sees all beings as Buddhas, views all men and women as parents, and regards all children as their own. This can be achieved because there is no self-attachment, no attachment to others, leading naturally to the absence of attachment to sentient beings, resulting in equality and no attachment to lifespan. Living long or short is viewed as the same. Thus, life and death are seen through with clarity. Long life and early death are treated equally. Life and death are one, a concept akin to Zhuangzi's view that life and death are parts of the same process, just like morning and evening are part of the same day. When evening comes, it's time to rest, without clinging to waking or dreaming. The concept of form pertains to external phenomena in the world, and in psychology, it relates to subjective notions or ideas. The next 2 concepts are even more crucial. non-form, and non-dharma form. All Buddhist teachings and what constitutes the Dharma must be let go of, for all forms are illusions, and nothing should be clung to. This is non-form. But if one believes that nothing exists, that everything is nothing, not even Buddha, not even what is not, then one falls into the trap of another attachment, the belief in emptiness. This is what non-dharma form refers to, the danger of becoming attached to the idea that nothing exists. Some who study the Diamond Sutra believe that it advocates emptiness, but this is a mistake. The concept of non-form and non-dharma form means that both the belief in absolute emptiness and the denial of all existence are incorrect. Therefore, in the Surangama Sutra, the Buddha says, to leave behind all forms, to realize all dharmas. To leave behind all forms is the explanation of non-form. To realize all dharmas is the explanation of non-dharma form. By leaving all forms, one realizes all dharmas. Thus, the Diamond Sutra is not about emptiness. It simply teaches that when one perceives the truth and sees the Dharma body, all forms are illusions. However, when we engage in practice, striving to do good and act virtuously, we must not be empty. We must be actively engaged in doing good. True, not true. The Buddha candidly explains the reasoning behind the statement. Therefore, you should not hold on to Dharma, nor should you hold on to non-Dharma. In truly practicing Buddhism, one should neither become attached to forms, nor be attached to non-forms. This is indeed difficult to grasp, so I'll share two stories, which, although humorous, contain profound truths. The first story involves Confucius during a time when he and his students were stranded without food in the state of Chen. The students suggested that they ask a wealthy man across the way for some rice. Confucius was reluctant but eventually agreed and asked who would go. Zilu, known for his impulsive nature, volunteered and went to the man's door. The man, recognizing Zilu as one of Confucius's students, decided to test him. He wrote the Chinese character for true, Zhen, and asked Zilu to identify it. Zilu, confident in his knowledge, said, "This is true, of course." The man promptly shut the door, saying, "You don't understand." Zilu returned empty-handed, and when he told Confucius what happened, Confucius remarked, "We've reached the point where we have nothing to eat, and you're still sticking with truth. Sometimes being true isn't the right approach." After hearing this, another student, Zigong, offered to try. He approached the same man, who again wrote the character for true. Recalling Zilu's failure, Zigong instead identified it as false. The man became even angrier and shut the door again. Zigong returned and reported this to Confucius, who sighed, "Sometimes you still need to be true." This illustrates the complexity of knowing when to be true and when not to be, highlighting the importance of balance and discernment in one's actions. This is the essence of not holding on to Dharma nor to non-Dharma. The second story is a Chan anecdote about two monks who were both enlightened and traveling together. In the old days, monks would carry a wooden staff with a square iron shovel on one end, used for planting or burying things. As they walked, they came across a dead body. One monk began chanting, "Amitabha, Amitabha," and buried the body, while the other monk continued walking without even looking at it. Later, someone asked their teacher, "Your two disciples are both enlightened, but I saw them handle the same situation differently. Which one was right?" The teacher replied, "The one who buried the body showed compassion. The one who did not was expressing detachment." The reasoning is that, in the end, all bodies return to dust, whether buried or not, so both actions are equally valid, depending on one's perspective. Burying the body reflects compassion, while not burying it reflects detachment. Through these two stories, we can understand the teaching of the Diamond Sutra, which states, one should not abide to, and one should not hold on to dharma or non-dharma. Clinging to a specific method or belief, or insisting on a particular way of practice, is an attachment to form and is incorrect. If you say, I don't cling to anything, so I am truly practicing Buddhism, you are also mistaken. Sometimes you do need to be serious and engaged. Therefore, one should not hold on to non-dharma either. The other shore. For this reason, the Tathagata always says, You bhikkhus, know that the dharma I speak of is like a raft. Even the dharma must be abandoned, how much more so the non-dharma. This is a crucial point. Buddha tells his disciples that the dharma he teaches is like a raft used to cross a river. Once you've crossed, you don't carry the raft with you. You leave it behind. Buddha's teachings are a means to an end, not an end in themselves. Even the true teachings must be abandoned once you have understood them, much less other teachings. Buddhism arrived in China with the idea that the sea of suffering is boundless, but turning back is the shore. But where is this shore? Buddha teaches that the shore is not somewhere you need to turn back to. It's right here and now, in letting go of everything. A Chan anecdote tells of Langhu Puan, a prince who became a monk, asking his teacher for a simple way to attain enlightenment. His teacher pointed to a mountain in front of the temple and said, When that mountain nods to you, I will tell you. At that moment, Puan was enlightened, realizing that the mountain nodding was a metaphor for the impossible. The shore is not found by turning back. It's found by letting go right here and now. Chan masters also teach that to achieve enlightenment, one must put down everything, including the idea of enlightenment itself. If you hold on to the idea of enlightenment, you are still attached to it, and the attachment prevents true realization. This is the essence of the teaching. Even the Dharma must be abandoned. How much more so is the non-Dharma?